Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for the My Story, APAC's AAPI Story Series. My name is Duc Nguyen Abrahamson. I am the Executive Director of the Asian Pacific American Chamber of Commerce, also known as APAC. This year, APAC celebrates 22 years of facilitating business relationships among Asian-owned and U.S.-based companies and promoting the economic advancement of the Asian American Pacific Islander. Businesses owned by Asian Americans from heritages from China, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam, the Philippines, and India, among other countries, Fortune 500 corporations, entrepreneurs, business professionals, cultural organizations and associations, and political and government dignitaries have supported APAC throughout the years and are the reason for our success. We are a collective voice for 30 plus Asian and Asian Pacific countries. We can do this through our strategic partnerships with Asian cultural associations throughout Michigan and nationally, and through our sponsors. Thank you to General Motors for supporting the AAPI small business community, and National ACE for being our national partner. Asian American Pacific Islanders' distinct challenges at work have often been overlooked with stereotype and misconception about AAPIs as the perpetual foreigner, an outsider. AAPI employees perceive lower levels of fairness, feel less able to be themselves at work, and are less likely to report their sponsors are effective at creating opportunities for them in the workplace. When people are put into a category, they are often dehumanized. The question is, how do I relate to that group, rather than how do I relate to Laura, Ashok, or Duke? You are going to hear three very distinct stories from three diverse Asian American Pacific Islanders. These professionals in three different industries sharing their personal stories. What we have in common and what everyone can relate to is the drive, the perseverance, and finding our community. Let me begin by introducing Laura Van Hootie. She is a benefits consultant for Hub International, an employee benefit firm with 7 Michigan locations serving small and mid-sized businesses. Laura enjoys serving public entities, schools, cities, community health departments, and a variety of privately owned companies. She has a drive and passion for implementing strategies that seek to help clarify the many confusing nuances of health insurance from a consumer's experience, as well as supporting the HR team by increasing engagement, simplifying processes, and creatively managing insurance expenses. She is also APAC's Small Business Action Committee Chair. Laura, I know you have a unique story. Can you please share with us?
Awesome. Yes, Duke, thank you. And I just think to myself, gosh, where do I begin? Do I begin now? Do I begin when I was born? I think what is really unique is I will start with this statement, which is I've always had a heart for the underdog, and I have never really found out why or what gives me this feeling. And I think it has a lot to do with my background, which I will start with. I was actually adopted from South Korea when I was 3 months old from 2 Caucasian parents. I also have a brother who was adopted from South Korea 6 months, and we're not blood related. We grew up in Michigan, here, the Port Huron area in St. Clair County. So for those of you that like to reference the thumb right here. And it was really interesting as far as how my experience as a child was growing up. I didn't experience a lot of racism. I wasn't accustomed to having to be concerned about bullying or really worried about being isolated because of what I look like or whatnot. But right around the time of the age of 13, maybe even 14, when you experience teenage hormones and different changes and trying to search for who you really are, I felt a little lost. And it was lost that I didn't understand the Korean heritage, the Asian heritage. I didn't understand certain jokes that I would start to hear from people and whether or not I should laugh Was that racism? Are they making fun of me? Why don't I even understand what they're saying? And the one moment that really hit me hard was when I was picking up Chinese food at a restaurant, and I think it was in Warren, for our family. And I was speaking with the woman behind the desk who was probably 10 years older than me, so probably about 24. And I walked in and my mom had given me the money, and she was so friendly, but she said, gosh, don't you hate when people refer to us as Oriental? We're not rugs. And I thought, you know what? I really don't know what to say, because number one, I don't even know if that is something that I ever consider. And number two, I thought, you know what? I may have called people Oriental. Is this something that is a racial, concern? And so at that point is when I felt lost. I felt lost as far as, well, I should really know what the Asian story is. I should know how to speak Korean. I should know how to cook. I should know what holidays are celebrated. And ever since then, even to this day, I feel a little lost. I go into the workplace and yes, I look Asian and I have the features and I'm full out from Korea, but I couldn't tell you what a recipe is that is from that culture, nor could I tell you what some common terms are. So it's been a little, it's awkward from that standpoint, because I think society as a whole, from my experience, they assume certain things that I know. And I've always wondered, now what do I do? There was actually, when we're talking about the work setting, an experience where one of the owners had made a comment that was with regards to Asian and certain foods that Asians ate that I happened to eat. And he made some comment about what I was eating. And I really didn't know how to respond, because I didn't understand if he was poking fun at me. This was right around when all of the DEI and the racism and the Black Lives Matter was surfacing. But the strange thing I've always felt is I never initially immediately get angry at people. And then I always question myself, well, should I? Am I disregarding the Asian population because I am not angry? And it's always been just a little lost. So now when I go into situations outside of the work setting, if I'm with my fellow mom friends, or if there's just, a sporting event where my children are at, I have 3 children and they happen to be mixed. I have a Caucasian husband. I do feel like I am doing a disservice because I've not invested in the time to learn the language and pass on certain heritages. So I felt like I'm minority amongst the minority from that standpoint. And I really encourage anybody who may have been adopted or who have maybe felt a little lost as far as how they should act and whether or not they have certain people to reach out to have a cup of coffee with and talk about how they're feeling. Reach out to me anytime. I would love to exchange stories and maybe talk about how to do different things to educate not only other people, but, starting with ourselves. Is there anything in particular, Duke, from what I said that maybe sounded a little interesting that you wanted me to elaborate on or anything like that?
I love that. Can you talk a little bit more? I know that, your story is really about being adopted, but can you talk a little bit more about, not only being adopted, but now you have kids of your own and how you see raising them? Is it differently? How are you approaching it differently, or are you being very conscious of, hey, I need to introduce them to certain parts of the community, or are they feeling the same things that you went through?
I think their experience, because I started to engage in conversations with them, especially probably right around when they were 5 years old, when they would notice that we have a different skin color. Because they're mixed, they don't have as prominent of Asian features as I do. But I remember when my daughter was about 4 years old, she said, "Are we African American, Mom?" And I said, "Well, we're not. But this is a good question because I would like to explain to you our background, and my grandma and grandpa look different than us and what to do." And I can proudly say that all 3 of my kids have really high self-esteem. Yes, they have bad days. I approach their upbringing and as far as culture in a very open way by saying, unfortunately, I can't pass on a lot of the knowledge of my roots or the country you're from, but together maybe we can learn lessons about different cultures, not just within the Asian community, but the African American, or even your grandma and grandpa, German and French Canadian. And I think because they have different types of friends and majority are all Caucasian, fortunately, they have never really been the victim of any type of stereotypical, racism or whatnot. My son the other day told me that someone asked if he could speak Korean, but it seems like that. And I don't know if it's a generational thing or because we live in a small community, but they really do not have any problem with people asking them questions, or if they want to have a friend over that asks me questions. Like I really am proud of that. And I think from the next few years, as I reflect at what stages of life they are, I have one in college, I have one entering high school in the next couple of years, and one in high school. It's a great time for me to capitalize on the resources available that we can use social media wise, YouTube, to learn together as a family on what our history is and how that has really transformed different businesses and even other schools in embracing diversity. So, yeah, good question.
I know that the popularity of DNA tests have gone up quite a bit in the last few years. Have you ever thought of possibly doing something like that, getting a DNA test, finding out really where you're from?
That's so funny you say that. My birthday is on Sunday, and one of the things I wrote down is I want them to give me a 23andMe or Ancestry test, because I run into different people who have leveraged those tests and actually tied back to relations around the world. And I think that would be an easy way for me to learn not only maybe more about my culture, but then also connect the dots in who I might be related to. Because one of the hesitations I've always had in going to Korea or finding my biological parents has been the time. And it's just not been a passion of mine. But I think if I get the test, I'll slowly be able to be intrigued and so forth. And I will end with this one thing, as far as any of you are watching who may be Asian or not Asian. There is a reason you're probably watching this video. And if I had a piece of advice to say, is that we all bring our own experiences, and we all have a certain demeanor as far as our race and so forth. So don't isolate when maybe the company celebrates Asian Heritage Month, or don't isolate just that month as an opportunity to get to know somebody of a different background than you. It could be maybe you're a male and you've never really warmed up to understand how females operate in your company or whatnot. I challenge yourself to just learn about people in general, whether it be Asian or not, different races and cultures. And I'm always a phone call or LinkedIn connection away to be that ear and have a conversation about that.
Thank you so much, Laura. And I want to let everybody know that all of our storytellers today, I will be including their contact information and more information about them in the description below. So I'm going to jump right into our next storyteller, Ashok Sevanan. He is the CEO of Integral, a digital transformation firm that helps businesses embed technology, DNA into their culture, processes, and experiences. Integral also facilitates Integrate Detroit to bridge the gap between self-taught boot camps and the technology workforce. Before Integral, Ashok was on a leadership team at Pivotal Labs and held technology and product roles in the manufacturing industry. Ashok has over a decade of experience in automotive and manufacturing software, and has collaborated with companies including Ford, GM, Bosch, and Thor. Ashok, can you share with us?
So In terms of a little bit of backstory, I was born in India, in the south, in a province or state called Kerala. And you've probably heard about the caste system in India. And my family is from like one of the lower castes. And I think I've been privileged to have ancestors along the way that have kind of had the courage and maybe a sense of adventure. I'm kind of rationalizing on their behalf that they kind of grouped together and took little leaps of faith that ended up having the caste system really not impact my brothers and my lives very much. I think there's specifically one social leader named Sri Narayana Guru, who is a major emancipator. And one of the things that it's hard to grow up in like in our caste and in our community without kind of knowing about him, and also the before and after of what it was like to be in our caste. And I think it's had a profound impact in terms of recognizing privilege and oppression today, and leads to a lot of the work we do in terms of driving accessibility, whether it's on the professional side or on a personal side for me. And then kind of more recently, I suppose, speaking of adventure and seeking opportunity, my grandfather, he really valued education and saw it around him and knew that it's something that he didn't have the opportunity for. He ran away from home to join the army. This is when India was part of the British rule still, and served on World War II before he even turned 18, so that he could generate enough income for his siblings to go to college. And so the value of education and overcoming boundaries in order to gain the benefits of education is something that, again, has innately been rooted into our family. And then he moved then to Kuwait way back in the day, before there was a lot of development. I want to guess that it was in the 50s, early 50s. And a lot of sacrifice went into that, where he lived. This is my grandfather lived in Kuwait, and my grandmother, my father, and my father's siblings all lived in India. So they lived a little bit more of a complicated life. And it was all kind of a sacrifice that the parents were making in order to give the children a better opportunity, and it's not an uncommon immigrant story, I think. And that led to more privilege as a result of, I'm sure, some luck, but also a sense of adventure and courage that folks amongst my ancestors had. And we also kind of realized when we lived in, my father kind of followed his father to Kuwait. He pursued a role in technology, which kind of puts us at, upper middle class is my guess. And enough so that I went to a British school where I learned to speak English. And we had a fairly expatriate or multinational community that we grew up in. And that all changed despite kind of this additional privilege that we had when the Gulf War happened. And we were I was 6, and I have a pretty good sense of what it probably feels like to be a 6-year-old when the pandemic hit, where you didn't know the last day you went to school and saw your friends, and you couldn't leave your house, and your parents had an additional sense of anxiety. And again, I think between luck and courage, my parents were able to lead a group of families out of Kuwait into Iraq, into Jordan, that accepted us as refugees, and eventually back to India. And so it's on a bucket list for me to go back to Jordan and pay my appreciation for accepting us. And also by paying it forward in terms of supporting refugees, whether it's here in the States or Canada, where I moved to Detroit from. And so I think, the theme so far is that there's been luck plus courage to seek opportunities that has helped us overcome challenges that are come our way, and a strong sense of community that has provided us a mutual ground of encouragement and empathy that allows us to kind of overcome the little hardships and keep our eyes on the bigger picture, whether it's for ourselves or for our future generations. So, all that being said, I came to North America as an international student. And there was a large amount of privilege in terms of how much that would have cost, and comparing it to even the classmates that I had in Canada who had student loans and everything. And my parents were able to afford for me to come to college. That does kind of change like a new realm of like a challenge that I was facing, where when I came over, as much as I'd been to British school, because we were disrupted by the war, my parents played it safe when we went back to the Middle East and put me in Indian school. And so I learned Hindi, I learned Arabic being in the Middle East. I spoke with some form of like Indian continental accent. And I was bullied for that when I came to Canada and as an international student, right? And there were references to Fez from that 70s show. Folks, both Canadian Indians as well as like other ethnicities in Canada, would say things. And I was also lucky that I hadn't typically been bullied until that point. So this concept of bullying, while it wasn't overly triggering for me, where I was completely debilitated, was a point of concern. And I was able to narrow it down to my accent and a few other things. And so I went through this, what you might even call a transformation, where I didn't go by the name of Ashok anymore. I would introduce myself as Ash. And now, funny story was, I spent my summer between what we call freshman and sophomore year here, listening to every single episode of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And I would like pause it, try and enunciate the syllables the same way. And I came back in sophomore year and everyone was really confused about what happened to your voice, what changed. And I noticed that there was we live in a world where I was looked upon differently, even though I was still like a person of color. My voice changed, my accent changed, and I was looked upon as someone with more influence. I was more like, I was given more benefit of the doubt, I would say, right? And so I think that may have fueled like a further anglicizing of how I projected myself. I would straighten my hair. I had there's embarrassing photos of myself with colored contact lenses. And just kind of going further along this path. My first job, I went by Ash, and I worked there for 6 years. So it was from pretty formative years, from the early 20s to late 20s. And towards the end, I'd gotten pretty senior there, and I'd be introduced as Ash to board level meetings. And then I met this really lovely company in Toronto called Extreme Labs. It was run by two Indian gentlemen. And despite being, an IT services firm, which there's a lot of stereotypes about Indian men running IT services firms already, it was a company that built mobile apps for the NFL and Facebook and Instagram, and it was a really cool place to work in Toronto. So it was, I think, a beginning of my journey, fueled by representation, where I decided when I started that job that I wasn't going to go by Ash anymore, and people were going to pronounce my name right. And I had the courage and confidence at that stage to say, when someone pronounced it wrong, that I'd pause them and say, hey, I feel like you and I are probably going to know each other for longer than this conversation. So I'm going to get this out of the way early. And over time, not even have to excuse myself that way. And then one day I won, this is somewhat tangential, but I won a Halloween competition. And I feel like that was my peak of needing to try and assimilate into North American culture, where I was at this bar, I won $100, where I had the best Halloween costume when we didn't celebrate Halloween. It wasn't a thing where I grew up. And I think there was something about that moment where I said hey, I think that you can listen to the underlying anxiety that you feel pretending to be someone else. Now you've gotten your badge of honor here, and it started the second journey of not being embarrassed about being Indian. When folks would kind of come up to me and ask about my heritage, I would get very offended very quickly, regardless of what their intent is. And I think over time, I've realized that some folks are really just curious. They're not trying to be offensive. They're not trying to be oppressive. this is an opportunity for you to proudly share more about your culture and heritage and share the similarities or the stark differences from what we have here, and be a mythbuster and be an educator and make it more comfortable for folks to ask questions so that it's not just starting with myself, but they can be curious in a respectful and kind way without having that underlying fear that can lead to it coming across the wrong way. And now that I feel like, I've had this transformation and I know, like I've grown my hair out, I let it be curly. Like it's very obvious that I'm an Indian man and I'm very proud of that. There is still a duality to being proud of your heritage, but also thriving in a world that hasn't quite been democratized based on how everyone looks. And I think there's a lot of, if you're watching this and you're conflicted with where you can be proud versus where you need to feel like you're fitting in, this is a conversation that I don't necessarily have a lot of great answers to, but one that I've put a fair amount of thought into myself. So I'd love to continue that. The other thing that I think that I found a lot of relatability, especially moving to Detroit, is that there's a large refugee population that have come from different countries. And the fact of the matter is, as much as like when we watch on TV about refugees, there's it's mostly negative what we're thinking. But when we're there, like my brother and I have kind of some fun memories of it. Like there was a lot of families that came over and lived at my parents' apartment. And as much as like the grownups had a lot of anxiety to deal with, the kids got to have a big, like few week-long sleepover when we were on this like war-driven lockdown, right? There were like, I put on a lot of weight as a 6-year-old because I was like, I remember a few things. And one of them was like, we might run out of food, so you should eat more. And like, there was this one guy, the story, I remember Moses of the story than actually living it, because my parents were waiting in line to get rations or to get food. And there was a British person standing behind, and my dad and him were striking up a conversation. At some point, he interrupted and looked down and said, "Your son looks like he's going to do okay in the war." Basically making a joke about my weight. And at the time I was like, I found the humor in that a lot more as I feel comfortable with myself. And as I share that with other refugees, there are more fun stories that come out from like little moments of joy or delight that are happy memories from like a generally tumultuous and uncertain time. And that's another kind of thing that I think I find as a point of relatability amongst other refugees, and something that if you've gone through that experience, I'd love to share and talk about both sides of what that experience was like. Thanks a lot for having me on here. That's what I got. Let me know if I can clarify anything.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ashok. I actually relate very much with your story because I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood, and I grew up trying to hide being as ethnic as I was. I tried to hide being Vietnamese. I tried to be more Americanized. That being said, I do celebrate myself and my uniqueness a whole lot more now. I think when I turned 18, my dad asked me, do you think you'll ever change your name? Yeah. And I'm like, no, I think I'm kind of used to it now. I think, I think I rock it pretty well. But back to your story, Ashok, you talked about your grandfather having this sense of adventure. I feel that you do have that as well, moving away from Canada, moving away from your family, starting your own business. Can you talk a little bit about your little sense of adventure and how, and how it got you to where you are right now?
Yeah, for sure. I think I've had the privilege of hearing these stories, right, of what my grandfather did. And there's obvious comparisons now that the story worked out of when he moved back to India compared to other folks in his community where, even financially, how much better he is off than the folks that maybe didn't take those leaps of faith. And the same thing with my father. I got to experience him working as an executive at a bank in the Middle East to taking this leap of faith and jumping out on his own. And even though he didn't have the cushy life that he had at the bank, you could just see that there was a sense of inspiration and drive that he had that was so different. And so for me, it was almost assumed at some point that this like entrepreneurship in some form, even if it was a side hustle, is just something that I kind of owed my grandparents and my parents as something to try out. And also, I think, one thing I'll say is that when there is a safety net that your family provides, you know that you can jump towards things like a trapeze artist with a safety net at the bottom versus one where there isn't one, and you're less likely to do the jump because it can be catastrophic if you don't land in a good spot, right? So I think coming to a country like Canada was also really helpful for me because the safety nets and accessibility that's provided for anyone in Canada that graduates high school can go to college, right? You can get into college. There's like something called OSAP, which is very low interest student loans that pretty much everyone has access to. So it's very, very different. I've noticed compared to the States in many ways, but it's also something that I have just grown up with that I'm a strong proponent for. And anytime we speak with policymakers here, it's the types of things that I really want to drive. It won't necessarily have a 4-year impact, but we've got case studies around the world that show how you can really democratize accessibility to opportunity by public funded programs like that. So I think the sense of adventure comes in part from inspiration from my ancestors, but also looking around at really objectively thinking about what's the worst that could happen. There was this one job, the one that I mentioned, working for the 2 Indian gentlemen. I was leaving a job that I was with at 6 years. Things were really cushy for me. It was going to be really hard for me to, lose my job there maybe. And I happened to come across this idea of fear setting, which is something you can look up by Tim Ferriss, where you think about like, what's the worst case scenario? And then you kind of live it out. And so I drove out like, here's the worst case scenario for myself, which was that I would become unhomed if I took this new job and it didn't work out. And then a series of other bad things happened. So I went out and I tried to imagine what it would be like if I was unhomed and I had only $5 in my pocket. And I said, let's see how I can spend 24 hours in Toronto. And I realized that there was a lot of assumptions I had. Some of them were around the unhomed community who were like extremely supportive in terms of telling me where I'm allowed to be and not allowed to be at night. Other parts I realized were that really there is a lot of opportunity out there if you have physical and mental health and fitness. And really it was, I kind of shifted from my fear being unhomed to my fear being that I lose my physical health or my mental health and I become a victim to like a drug addiction maybe, because those felt like the things that if I was in that scenario, I wouldn't be able to pick myself back up and get back on my way. And kind of allowed me to not only accept this job, realizing that I was in a pretty good space, but also kind of putting yourself out there in these little experiments can be ways in which you can learn a lot about yourself, a lot about invalid assumptions that you had about certain members of our community and society, and also things that, reorganizing your own priorities and what you want to support for yourself and for others.
Wow, thank you so much, Ashok. I feel like your life is more of an adventure than that you're telling us. There's a lot of things that you've gone through, that you've put yourself through. Thank you so much for sharing with us today. And I'm going to share my own story today as well. And I'm going to start by letting everybody know I have a tattoo. And this tattoo reminds me of the strength and perseverance that has brought me to where I am today. Any roadblocks that come my way is that it's a roadblock. It can be moved. We can move around it, or I can find another way. And it's also an ode to my mom. So I was born in Vietnam in 1975. I was weeks old when the fall of Saigon happened. So my dad came home from the Army, and he basically told my mom, pack up the kids, we are leaving. And so she swaddled me. I was, like I said, weeks old. She swaddled me and safety pinned me to her shirt to keep me safe. And she packed 2 bags of, 1 bag of clothes, 1 bag of food. And they literally ran. They ran to the shore where there was a small fishing boat waiting for us. And on the way there, my mom got pushed over into the water and stampeded on. So people were stepping on her back. And every time somebody stepped on her back, I would dip into the water. So she would push against the ground and basically do a push-up to try to keep me above water level so that I could breathe. And through all the chaos and through all the screaming and loud noises, my dad heard her, found her, picked her up, and put her on this boat. And she says that the only reason that I am here today is because she swaddled me and safety pinned me to her shirt. And years later, we came to Michigan as refugees, and I grew up here. And my parents didn't speak English. My dad had $12 to his name, and he spent it on American cigarettes. But we persevered because my mom was willing to learn. She was willing to work hard, and we were surrounded by people that were willing to help us. And that really kind of brings me to where I am today. My mom ended up opening up a bridal salon. She became an entrepreneur, not because she had a sense of adventure, but more of she had a sense of survival. She had children that she needed to make sure that were fed. I grew up walking around with a box of cookies, and I was a little chubby when I was younger as well, Ashok. So I walked around with a box of cookies, and that made me feel good. And I was constantly eating these cookies, and my mom was able to provide for our family because she became an entrepreneur, because she had the sense of adventure or the sense of survival. Like, I have to do these things to make sure that my kids are going to be able to eat, that I'm going to be able to feed Duke those cookies. And so she opened up a bridal salon, and it really was not only because she persevered, and not only because she was willing to work hard, but she was surrounded by people that were willing to help. Again, we didn't speak English when we came here. The church actually had a little old ladies. I remember when I was very, very young, these little old church ladies would come over to our apartment and try to teach us English. They didn't know how to speak Vietnamese, and we didn't know how to speak English. And it ended up just being a party. Like, we'd cook for them and they'd eat and they'd come visit and then they would leave. But we learned English. I don't speak with an accent. People are like, oh, your English is really, really good. Well, it's 47 years old. I mean, I probably spent, the number of weeks I've spent in Vietnam, I can count on my fingers. But and my dad as well. My dad, he jokes around a lot, and he'll ask me to do things for him, and he's like, my English is not really good. I go, BS. You've been here longer than you've ever been in Vietnam. So that's no longer an excuse. But he uses it against me because he thinks that I'll be more willing to help him because I'm the daughter. I'm the girl, his little girl. I'm supposed to help him. I'm supposed to help him out. But back to my story about my mom working hard and providing for us and safety pinning me to her shirt. When I was pregnant with my first, my mom gave me a card, and there were safety pins all over the card, and basically the card said that I safety pinned you to my heart to keep you safe. Here are safety pins so that you can safety pin your kids to your heart to keep them safe. And I still cry about it now. So my tattoo is a tattoo of a safety pin, and it's on my wrist, and it's right over my vein that goes directly straight to my heart. And it has the 3 hearts on it to represent my 3 kids. So this is my, this is my story of perseverance. This is my story of survival. And, sometimes, I think I have a bad day. I think I have a bad day. I didn't raise enough money. But all I think of is like, I survived today. Today was easy. I didn't grow up in a a war-torn country, come to another country, not speaking the language, not having any money, and come to where I am to have a bad day because somebody didn't give me the money that I asked for. So that helps me get through my day. It helps me survive, and it also helps me to think like, whatever I'm doing, if I'm having a hard day, it's really not that bad. It's really not that bad. And everybody that worked so hard to get me to where I am didn't do that for me to decide, I'm going to give up on these things, or I'm not going to provide for my children. I can't do that. I can't do that because of all those things that have happened prior to me, all those people that have put in the hard work because they had to, or because they had a sense of adventure, or because they decided that, coming to a country where they didn't have money, where they didn't speak the language was the best thing that they could do for their children. And that's also why I work for APAC. It's because I want to be able to provide for those companies or for those people that need help, that are starting businesses that want help and need resources. I want to be able to provide that for them, like those people that helped and provided resources for my mom to start her company. So oftentimes I say, I am a refugee, I'm a minority, I am an immigrant, I am a child of entrepreneurs. And it really is full circle for me to work here at APAC because it is a job of passion, and it's a lifelong, my lifelong experiences brought me here, and it's like a puzzle piece that fits so perfectly to where I am today. So that is my story, and I want to thank you guys for listening and hearing my story, and please share your own stories in the comments below. I want to thank everybody for joining us for my story and APAC's AAPI story series. APAC is a place where AAPI-owned businesses and AAPI business professionals can connect, do business, and find our community and those who support us. More information about APAC and our partners, National ACE, and the Storytellers will be located in the description below. These stories are unique to us, but these are also stories that many people have, regardless of their ethnic heritage or their personal background. Please leave a comment and share your stories with us in the comment section below. Thank you, everybody.